Hmm.
Afternoon, everyone.
Hi, Arnie.
I'm good.
Good afternoon.
I feel better now seeing that Arnie's still at work too.
It's my only computer with a screen or a camera.
Gotcha. Yeah, I don't like using my phone.
Charles, where are you located right now?
In my basement.
Okay, you said good morning just to throw us off a little bit.
Yeah, no, I always say good morning.
Okay. I thought you were in the Bahamas like you should be.
No, actually, I probably would be more on the other side of the world if it was actually morning.
I'm not getting technical.
Yeah. No, I'm actually, I think it's about 9 miles northwest of Lexington downtown.
Okay.
My mailing address is Rockridge, Bass. I'm on Maple Swamp Road, and actually at the corner of Maple Swamp and Turkey Hill Road.
I know your house.
Do you? Okay.
Well, I know the intersection there.
Well,
And the original, there was a guy who was sergeant at arms for the U.S. Senate or something that bought that corner there and started an orchard back up through there, that close to that intersection. That was maybe before your time, but I know where you are. That's good country.
our property actually is the one that has the pond, if you know where the pond is.
Yeah.
It's I'm told it's where the swamp was, and during a heavy rain, the swamp returns.
Wow.
So, Arnie, are we waiting for the Planning Commission to grace us with their presence?
We'll wait for a couple more minutes and then we'll get started.
Okay.
Also,
Sure.
Bob Adams.
Yeah. Bob too.
So then, is it my understanding, well, you have Charlie written on the front of your, are you good with Charlie?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're good with Charlie? Now,
I
what-
am actually one of few people who went through 6 years in the U.S. Navy by my first name. Those chief bosun's mates couldn't wrap their tongue around my last name.
True that. So that's good to keep you simple.
Yes, absolutely.
But did you have another partner that was going to be here helping in the your person that has followed you in that position?
No, this actually the person that's going to join us is Bob Adams, who started Housing Forward.
That's it. Okay, Bob Adams. Yes.
And Bob is, well, there was a bit of a bio, I think, included.
Yes.
He has been an advocate of affordable housing for 45 years and has a wealth of knowledge. And it was my feeling that Bob could contribute a whole lot more to this conversation than what I can, because I've been really out of the loop for a while.
Got it.
That happens when you retire.
Well, it's good to have the history, and then it's good to have what's happening at the present up-to-date time so that we can pick that trail up and try to go into the future.
Absolutely. Well, I'm a strong believer. If you really don't know where you're going until you see where you've been.
True that. That helps if you can see where you've been. sometimes you have blinders on. You don't want to really see where you've been.
Yeah.
But every day is a learning experience,
That's true.
or should be. Arnie, you interrupt my chatter anytime you wish.
I think we're ready to go. I see that Mr. Adams has joined us, so we've got all our participants. So unless anybody else has anything, I'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone able to join our discussion. I'm Arnie Glazer, the Planning Director for the City of Lexington. I'd like to extend a special welcome to Charles Muellner and Bob Adams for sharing their housing knowledge with our community. I'd also like to thank Marilyn and John for specifically organizing this workshop. Because this is a training session and not a formal meeting, and neither Threshold nor the Planning Commission needs to formally open or call the meeting to order. And there won't be a set of minutes. We'll have notes from the meeting, but not a formal set of minutes like you're used to having. And there are not going to be any items to approve, so we won't have that to deal with. In accordance with the agenda that you see on the screen, I'm going to provide a quick summary of the Comprehensive Plan Housing chapter, and then introduce our panel. And each panelist is going to provide you with about 10 or 15 minutes to share their experiences. That will then be followed by a facilitated discussion that will be handled by Crystal and Marilyn. And then we'll wrap up with conclusions and recommendations. We do have an updated comprehensive plan that was adopted last November by City Council, and there are 13 strategies listed in the housing chapter that are to generally be accomplished in the next 20 years. That comp plan looks out about 20 years. One of the strategies is to organize seminars and workshops on housing issues identified in the comprehensive plan needs assessment. And I'm not going to read through all of our strategies because both Threshold and the Planning Commission have been provided those strategies previously multiple times. But I did think it would be helpful to read through the needs assessment. This is on page 75 of the comp plan. And it states in part, at least, while a balanced housing market provides opportunities for most residents, very low housing vacancy rates as found in Lexington can drive up housing prices and limit opportunities for new buyers and renters alike. Research, market studies, and surveys specifically show a need for, and then it lists 6 items. And the first one is preservation and expansion of affordable housing opportunities. The second one is additional appropriate and compatible multifamily rental housing. The third one is new age-friendly housing opportunities, including age-restricted multifamily and senior living. The fourth one says continued promotion of adaptive reuse, revitalization, and infill development. The fifth one says continued exploration and expansion of innovative housing options, such as accessory dwelling units. And the last one says protection of neighborhood character by limiting encroachment for commercial uses, promoting home ownership, and supporting housing rehabilitation programs. So those are generally what we're trying to accomplish in that needs assessment for the housing chapter. We do have Mr. Muellner and Mr. Adams with us this evening. I'm going to introduce both of them now. And then if Mr. Muellner, you could just kick off with a discussion and share anything that you would like to with us. And then Mr. Adams, if you could just follow Mr. Muellner. Mr. Muellner served as the Director of Multifamily Housing for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for 23 years, where he supervised underwriting, approval, and servicing of all FHA-insured multifamily property loans for the Commonwealth of Virginia. Charlie retired in 2014 and currently serves as the Chair of Board of Community Housing Partnership. Mr. Adams is the founder and senior advisor to Housing and Development Advisors, a Richmond-based firm that provides consulting services to nonprofit, for-profit, and public sector clients in the areas of affordable housing, development, finance, and policy. Bob has worked in the field of affordable housing and community development for nearly 40 years at the state, local, and federal levels. His work has included the development and financing of affordable housing, as well as advocacy and community education. He has served on a variety of local and national boards. Mr. Muellner, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. I appreciate it. Thank you, Arnie. Is Bob on the Zoom or on telephone?
Pardon?
Is Bob Adams
Yeah.
on?
Yep, I'm on
He's
the
with
I'm on
us.
the Zoom, Charlie.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I can't see you.
I may be off the screen for you.
Okay. Wasn't sure you were there. Prior to joining HUD, I was also a mortgage banker. And I also worked 8 years for a developer in North Carolina building apartment complexes, primarily through Farmer's Home at that time, now Rural Development. And one of the things that I learned years ago was in trying to determine whether or not a need existed and a demand, because they are two separate things. You may have a need, but not necessarily a demand. But in determining that, it was important to identify the target income range of people that you were hoping to house. And we did that primarily in development. We did that through a market study. The need to do that gives you comfort in the dollars that you're getting ready to spend. And typically in a 100-unit apartment complex, you can spend upwards of $250,000 as a developer before you really get to first base. So you need to be fairly certain of the fact that you're going to be able to rent those apartments. And I speak strictly to apartments in this case, because of that required investment before you can initiate a loan and have those sunk costs returned to you. So I think it's important to do that. Even more important today, because of the various levels. There's many different levels of support to point tax credits offered through the Housing Finance Agency of Virginia, or the VHDA. Tax credits target the area median income as a baseline for how to determine need. And tax credits typically support housing that will be available for people who make 80% of the area median income for the area in which you want to build the apartments. And area median income, of course, is different in each specific area, but is 80% of that is a fairly good income in some areas. Probably the best example would be in a thriving college town. Let's say Charlottesville as an example, or maybe Blacksburg, where they have a lot of professors and a lot of college teachers who are rather, they may not think so, but paid very well as compared to, say, the blue collar workers of those communities. And so the area median income can be skewed in those instances, but 80% of that can still be to reach down to the lower income levels. Almost always requires involvement by either local, state, or federal government, and typically through the form of some form of rental assistance or Section 8 subsidy. A developer can't really build affordable housing for lower income people without that kind of rental propping, if you will, or rental subsidy, because the cost of building a house, even and more specifically today, as an example, where the cost of goods has gone up dramatically, it almost always needs some form of Section 8, Farmers Home or Rural Development rental assistance, or some other form through the state or the local governmental authority. So that's basically where we used to come from. And with HUD, that was one of the first things we looked to, was a market study. and what the intention of the developer was as far as providing housing for what group, for what income group people. And with that, was we would go forward as far as underwriting a particular loan type. And I see that it appears that Lexington has had a form of market study, but it doesn't go through the income levels that I had to actually look for. But I doubt that there's going to be a huge rush of people wanting to develop unless there is a need in either the 80% of area median or lower, granted some form of subsidy available. Most of the subsidy that I'm familiar with in the city of Lexington today is in the form of project-based assistance, which basically means that Section 8 availability is for that unit in that property at that address. It doesn't move, it stays with that property. There is another form of Section 8 called Housing Choice Vouchers or portable vouchers, where the subsidy goes with the unit or the family or the person. And that person could leave Lexington and go to Florida and still have that same Section 8. Or they could come to Lexington from Florida and bring that Section 8 with them. But beyond that, I'm not familiar with any other assistance that can stimulate the developer's interest in building an apartment complex or even individual housing, because of the cost of building it is going to put the proposed rent way out of reach of what we would consider affordable. Are there any questions?
Hello. I'm not sure what the process is tonight in terms of who gets to ask a question, but to stop me if I'm wrong. My name is Jamie Gooden. Thank you all, panelists, and everyone else for joining us tonight. Really appreciate your time. I have one main question. So the last I checked, opportunity zones, the theory was ahead of the practice. Where are we today? Have folks started working out those mechanics in the real world? Is it something that we can be confident enough in to be promoting to potential developers?
That's a question for me.
Or anyone?
Yeah, I can take it unless, and Charlie, you can add to it. So opportunity zones. So I assume that means you've got some opportunity zone eligible area within the city of Lexington. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of agree with you. Opportunity zones was a program that kind of the hype for it ran ahead of its actual utility. And I think that's not necessarily unique to opportunity zones, but that happens a lot of times that programs kind of get oversold at the beginning. So opportunity zones, I think, are starting to, over the last year or two, you know, I think they were launched in about 2017. Within the last couple of years, I think the market is starting to understand opportunity zones. And, you know, we're not going to go down a rabbit hole here to talk about how those credits work, but it's basically a way in which your capital gains tax can be deferred up to 10 years and then actually partially forgiven. So the idea is attracting developer capital into specified areas that meet certain demographic indicators. You know, the place I would I would go, and I should also say that housing opportunity zones were not designed for affordable housing. There is a way in which mixed use projects that involve some housing can qualify for opportunity zones and benefit from some of those tax benefits, but I think it's pretty limited. Now, one of our state level organizations that you ought to begin to, and maybe you already are, begin to work with is a statewide nonprofit called Virginia Community Capital. They are a what's called a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. That is, it's really a lender that is operating with a public purpose. So VCC makes loans all over the state, but they also have a pretty robust opportunity zone initiative where they are trying to bring investors in and connect them with deals that are located in opportunity zones. So, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, whoever is kind of managing your opportunity zone program, to get together with VCC. They'd be happy to come out and talk to you more specifically about the program and talk about, show you some examples of deals that have been done around the state. And to be honest, there haven't been a lot. And I guess I would say, I think the future of opportunity is a personal opinion now. The future of opportunity zones is cloudy because it does not have a strong constituency in Washington right now. So it's not the horse I would choose to ride to really invest a lot of time and effort in right now. Let's kind of see how things go. But my short answer would be get in touch with VCC, Virginia Community Capital, and I think they'd be happy to do a lot more education and maybe even connect you with some investors that are looking for places to develop. Charlie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, sir, that sums it up.
Okay, all right. Well, let me take just a couple minutes to talk about a couple things. One, first of all, and as Arnie said, I've been involved in affordable housing virtually my entire career. Been doing it for 45 years, mostly here in Virginia, some up in Washington at the federal level. And I've done it really from all sides of the table. I've been a developer. I've worked for the state and was a funder. I've been involved in equity investments. I've done a lot of policy development work. The last 15 years or so, worked a lot with a group called Housing Forward Virginia, which is really a housing communications organization, policy development, education organization that promotes the value of affordable housing around the state. So have had a really diverse experience with doing affordable housing. So that said, my first thought is congratulations to all of you. You got a great turnout tonight for a mid-sized or smaller community of people who want to talk about affordable housing and believe that affordable housing is an important aspect of how you provide for a vibrant community. And trust me, I have done this all over Virginia for decades, and not every community recognizes that. Not every community would turn out a group of people like you during dinner time to devote some time to talk about this issue. So kudos to you, and I wish you great success and luck with what you're doing. And both Charlie and I, we're chat a little bit with you tonight, but I can speak for Charlie to say we're certainly happy to continue to help you as you move down this path, because it's wonderful work and it's important for your community. It's important for Lexington. So, and the last thing I'll say is, I'm going to have to jump off. I know you're going to talk until 7 o'clock or so. I've got to be at an event at 7:30, so I'm going to have to jump off around 6:30. And I'm sorry, I'll miss the last few minutes of your conversation. So let me just paint a big picture, which is this is actually a really good time to be engaging with the issue of affordable housing, workforce housing, whatever you want to call it. And you know, and you all understand this. This is an extremely broad and complex subject area, right? So affordable housing is a spectrum, and it's an enormous spectrum. And at one end, you have critical needs of people who are homeless, who don't actually have a place to live in the night, maybe living on the street or living in an emergency shelter, or maybe doubled up or tripled up because they can't afford a place of their own. And then at the other end, you have moderate income working families with stable incomes who simply can't afford to become homeowners because the price of housing in this country, in Virginia, in Lexington, has been increasing for decades at a faster rate than incomes. So that gap between what you can afford and what's available in the marketplace, that gap has been growing. And that's what makes it very difficult for you know, an average young working family to be able to maybe buy a house in the neighborhood that they want, or, you know, or even buy a house in the neighborhood they grew up in. I mean, that's something we see. Certainly, I live in Richmond. We see that here. We see it a lot in Northern Virginia, where people grow up in an area and then they're priced out as soon as they come back from college and they want to come back to their neighborhood. There's no way they're going to be able to do that. So, so you're taking on a subject which is very broad, and I guess part of my message to you would be, for that reason, I would encourage you to really focus in on a particular part of that spectrum that you want to, you know, really begin to make progress on. So I started out by saying I think it's a great time to be having this conversation, and that is partly because we're really at a point where resources for to develop, to produce, to assist households with housing costs, they're really at an all-time high. We've been extremely successful advocates and people who believe in the importance of affordable housing have had a lot of success in the last 5 years at the federal level, at the state level, and in some cases at the local level. You know, speaking from as a City of Richmond resident, we now have a very substantial city housing trust fund in Richmond that 5 years ago we didn't have at all. And now we're up to around 10 or $11 million a year that we put out in an affordable housing trust fund. I know Lexington is not in a position to create that kind of a locally funded housing trust fund, but the good news is there are a lot of other places that you can look for resources. Me mention just what's happening at the state level, because that's where a lot of my efforts have been concentrated for years. So we have 2 state housing agencies, you're probably aware of this. The Department of Housing and Community Development, which is a state agency, they administer the Community Development Block Grant Program. I'm not sure whether Lexington has gotten CDBG grants in the past, but yeah, you're nodding your head, so you know what that is. Yeah. And that's a very important resource that can be used for housing, for rehabilitation, to improve the homes of people who you know, otherwise wouldn't be able to live in quality housing. So CDBG. DHCD also administers a whole range of other types of housing assistance, the federal resource called the Home Program. And then we now have in Virginia a state housing trust fund. And again, in the last 4 years, Governor Northam has really been a great supporter of the housing trust fund. And we've gone from a state housing trust fund that was $12 or $15 million a year to now we're up around 70, 75 million. So it's been a big increase in resources through our state housing trust fund. DHCD also has a variety of other programs, some of which I'm sure already operate in Lexington, such as the weatherization program, which provides energy improvements to the homes of very low income people. So DHCD, a big resource. That's an agency you should be talking to. You're a Main Street community, I believe, right? Your downtown is Main Street.
Yes.
So you already have a relationship with DHCD through Main Street. And I know one of the things that I saw in some of your planning was second story housing downtown. That's a great idea. Main Street supports that. There's, obviously historic tax credits. It's a historic district in your downtown. So that's almost a low-hanging fruit to think about doing that kind of second story housing in your downtown. So DHCD, big resource for you. Get one of their housing program administrators to come out and participate in a session with you would be important. The other state agency we have is Virginia Housing. They recently changed their name. You may know them as Virginia Housing Development Authority, VHDA. They're now Virginia Housing. They are one of the premier state housing finance agencies in the country. They do a lot of housing lending, both for multifamily development and single family mortgage lending. They have a program called Spark, which targets low to moderate income home buyers, really focuses on that population that I was just talking about, families who would like to become homeowners but can't afford, either can't afford a 20% down payment with conventional financing, or need a low interest rate, or need some other type of down payment assistance to help them be able to get into a home. So VHA's got great home ownership programs, and then they operate the principal rental housing development program in the country, anywhere right now, which is called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. That's a misnamed program, and it causes negative community reaction because it's called the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It should be called the Workforce Housing Program, because that's who the tax credit program serves, are people in the probably $25,000 to $55,000 a year range. The rents are, probably not that far below your market rate rents. So tax credits are an important way to provide workforce housing in your community. VHDA is the go-to place for that. And then VHDA in the last few years, they've started to do a lot of grant making. They are very interested in developing collaborative relationships with local governments. And they support a lot of local planning around affordable housing. They just did a grant program. I'm not sure what planning district you're in, Arnie. Well, you all probably know. Virginia Housing made grants to all of those PDCs, all 22 PDCs in the state. And those grants range from $1 million to $3 million. And those PDCs are going to turn around and put that, you got 2 million? Okay, so, those PDCs are going to turn around and put that money directly into quote unquote shovel ready affordable housing projects in communities across the state. So that's enough about Virginia Housing. Talk to them, get them to come out to your community as well. They've got a bunch of resources that they can put on the table, and they're going to be anxious to work with you. So the last thing I'll say is, I've looked through your plan and your housing needs assessment, and what's in your comp plan, your housing element, your comp plan. It's really all great stuff, and you've really thought through a lot of ideas about what you need and what you should be doing. So that's very ambitious. I would say a couple things that would be useful for you as a group to do over the next, 3, 4, 5 months. Really do a good inventory of the assets that you have available to you. And those are assets that the city of Lexington can provide. Do you have land? Do you have financial resources? Do you have human resources, person power that you can apply to this? What exactly are those resources? And then also, what are the resources in the community? What is your business community interested in providing and bringing to this partnership? You've got two big universities in your community that, although I guess VMI, all the students are on campus, so they're not really affecting the local housing market, but they employ a lot of people, right? So all of their employees are putting pressure in your housing market, W&L students and employees. So, those universities need to come to the table, and they have assets that they can provide. So I think that kind of asset mapping for, what you have, what you can work with is really important. And a part of that is sort of, who are your partners in this? And that could be, like Charlie's on the board of Community Housing Partners, an organization I used to work for. That's a big nonprofit. They do affordable housing all over Virginia and all over the Southeast, really. You've got Lynn with Rockridge Habitat, who I've chatted with. I'm on the, full disclosure, I'm on the board of Habitat Virginia. So I have a great appreciation of the work that Habitats do all over the state. You may have some other housing nonprofits that are operating in your area, and for-profit developers who are operating in your area. Those are all partners you should bring to the table and do some planning with. I said you've got a bunch of great ideas there. I think it's important that you begin to think about priorities. What do you want to work on first, in what order? And eventually, take that set of strategies that you have, that list of the strategies, and put them into a time frame and assign some responsibilities. Who's going to take the lead on this? What are the assets that are going to be available to carry out that strategy? Last thing I'll say is the action in affordable housing in Virginia right now is at your level, at the local level. And that is because, as I said, we have resources. Where we find ourselves blocked sometimes is with land use and land availability. And that is a local issue. That is not something the state can do anything about, the federal government can do anything about. So your role is critical in terms of, and I know a part of your agenda here in your planning has been to look at your zoning, look at land use. You talk about affordable dwelling unit, and also accessory dwelling units. Those are all really good ideas that you need to be exploring and see how you can, what you can do to make your regulatory system be supportive of some of these strategies that you want to accomplish. So, talked a long time, but I'll let you all sort of, Arnie, head into your general discussion, and I think Charlie and I'll chime in as we need to.
Yes, thank you, Bob. Thank you, Charlie. We are so fortunate to have both of you with us this evening. As far as the state of Virginia is concerned, you're at the top as far as the premier people who are advisors to people like us in the state, in the city government, as well as in the housing industry. I know Charlie has held my hand many times when I've had issues and questions, and he's been a lifesaver for Lexington already, because if Mountain View Terrace fails, Lexington fails. And so we're trying to make sure that it is a successful multifamily housing development, as it has been for almost 50 years. Going back to talk about threshold, because we're going to circle back after Crystal and I say a few things. We're going to circle back and start asking questions. And so we haven't heard the last of Bob and Charlie yet. Threshold, as the City Housing Commission, has served this city pretty well since, I'm thinking back to the mid to late 80s up to now, to develop housing rehab and other housing opportunities for low to moderate income families in strategic areas of need in Lexington. And currently, as Ani said previously, we're adding a component to focus on education of the housing industry, in addition to the affordable or workhouse housing industry. The current housing climate on a national scale, whether it's in a discussion about grant funding or the best uses of vacant land, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic housing needs in a community, or reports on worst case housing scenarios, even availability and affordability for higher income households, the housing stock in many areas, such as in this area, tend to have very serious deficits. Just ask some of the newcomers to the Lexington area who were seeking housing this past summer. People were desperate. The 2021 report called the Worst Case Housing Needs Report that went to Congress refers to vulnerable low-income families who are not yet in affordable housing. They're in market rate housing, but they should be in affordable housing because half of their already low income goes toward rent alone. Then they have utilities to pay, they have childcare, they have car payments, they have food, everything that the rest of us have to pay, they have to pay too, to take care of their families and to cover that with the other half of their income. The housing cost burden, and that's what that's called, is a defeating and impossible means of survival, even for some families who are already in affordable housing. So it's even tougher for those who are not. The bottom line is this: on a local level, we already know that increasing our housing stock should be a prioritized consideration, or none of us would feel compelled to be here this evening. The low to moderate income housing, as well as market rate housing, are all needed. In addition, the report that I mentioned confirms that there are benefits to certain things. Benefits to an expansion of the rental assistance program, which Charlie mentioned, the housing choice vouchers. But to increase that or to expand it requires a decision on a state level. The program just recently released people to receive vouchers who had applied almost 2 years ago on a 1 or 2 day open application period. They are just now responding to the January of 2020 applications. So, and the state only makes those decisions and hands that information down on a local level as to when to open the applications up and when to release vouchers. Also, preserving and supporting the affordable housing that we already have in the local area. All of those things are crucial in this big picture scheme of things. In addition, removing many of the massive government-related barriers to development of new affordable housing, which I have firsthand knowledge of, believe me. Improving that alone will go a long way right here in Lexington to encourage our localities, our developers, our current owners to add more housing stock from our perspective. And just wanting to throw that out there to give you a little bit of history and a little bit of what's going on now. And I want to turn this over to Crystal. She has a few comments about what's happening right now.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Charlie and Bob, for providing us with that background and the information. You've probably seen me taking copious notes to pass on and to remember to make some connections with some folks. But I just wanted to kind of speak on behalf of Threshold. In addition, my full-time job is with the Chamber of Commerce. And one of our standing committees is a workforce and education committee. And we have been dealing with workforce issues off and on for a few years. We were fortunate enough through our economic development committee to receive a READY grant, which is a rural, excuse me, I can't remember the acronym, but it's a rural economic development initiative. And that's technical assistance provided through USDA and a consultant to identify things that can help us do better as a community to promote economic development. One of the prioritized items that came out of the study that the consultant did was workforce housing. And we all have probably heard or seen our local businesses struggling with getting employees. And that's a big issue. So all of the READY grant was an initiative through USDA that all of our jurisdictions and the chamber, other partners, economic development directors with Rockbridge County and Buena Vista supported, in addition to the city of Lexington. We have come out of that study we need to do a housing assessment to identify, as Bob said, what we have, what we can do, where are there opportunities for us. And that housing assessment will, once it's done and completed, will provide us with a steady tool to present to CSPDC, DHCD, to these organizations that have all of these resources available for grants to help facilitate development of workforce housing. So without that, I think we may be a bit stuck. That's my personal opinion. CSPDC is currently undertaking a housing study, but that housing study covers their entire service area, which includes districts like Harrisonburg, Rockingham County, Augusta, Waynesboro, Stanton, and we're the smaller entity out of all of that. So is that housing study really going to benefit the city of Lexington? Is that really going to give us the data we need for Lexington and Buena Vista and Rockbridge County? And I realize that this is a Lexington City meeting. Again, chamber hat. We've got to think about our whole region and our whole community as a whole. The chamber's also part of the JMU Regional Economic Recovery Series, which has a workforce housing group that is looking into this specifically for different regions. So I just want to throw that out there as an item of interest, that maybe somebody that we might want to partner with to talk to about these things. I'll keep it short. One more thing I wanted to mention is that in Bob's remarks, like, economic development is a huge thing for our region. I mean, without that, we're going to remain stagnant. And I keep saying region, Lexington City included. But we've got to focus on identifying what our assets are and what the zoning restrictions are for all of our jurisdictions, including Lexington, to see what we can do better. So I'm coming at you all, I'm speaking to you all this evening in the spirit of both the city of Lexington identifying their needs, as well as our Rockbridge region as a whole, because I believe that there's a lot of properties out there that could either be rehabbed, fixed up. Let's get them livable and let's get them affordable for people moving to this area, or young professionals coming out of our area that may want to purchase a home and can't afford to, even if they've, got a job. That's the issue that I see. So with that, I would like to start the conversation with everybody, if everybody's willing, and I'll throw out the first question. Where do we go from here?
Hey, this is Jamie again. Thank you very much, Crystal. You mentioned this housing assessment, and you alluded to tri-municipal cooperation on that. What is the status of that cooperation? Are we cooperating?
The new economic development director for the county of Rockbridge is Brandy Flint. She has created an RFP. And that I'm happy to send you that draft. it's a draft at this point because I don't believe all parties have signed off on it. But it's basically to provide a comprehensive review of all of our plans to ensure that housing is addressed across all 3 jurisdictions, Lexington, Buena Vista, and Rockbridge County.
Thank you. Perhaps Marilyn or Leslie could speak to the status of that RFP.
Just that we have not been approved any funding yet. I think we're waiting on a recommendation and proposal from the city manager, but that hasn't come before us yet. Yeah, here's Jim.
Yeah, I just saw the draft about 2 hours ago. So it has a few tweaks to make to it, as well as going through the proper channels to get to us.
Of course, it's a draft. It's in draft form.
If I may add, as Leslie said, I have not recommended anything to City Council yet. One of the questions I had, which was just answered today, is what's the price range for such a study? Currently, Buena Vista and Rockbridge have dedicated $15,000 each to the project or to the study. I didn't want to have to go to City Council and say, okay, let's match that and do 15,000 and find out the study was 75,000. And I've got to go back 6 months later or 3 months later and say, oh, by the way, I need another 10,000. So I wanted to make sure I knew and we all agreed on what was the cost of this study going to be, relatively speaking. And I got an answer today, and I do plan to go to City Council and ask that we participate as well with our partners.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Olivia Rains. I'm with the Central Shenandoah PDC. So I wanted to jump in just because we've been mentioned a few times and just give a little bit of an update about where we are. As Bob mentioned, we received $2 million from Virginia Housing several months ago to start a housing program at the PDC. And so I've just stepped into a new role at the PDC as the housing program manager. And so the primary thing I'm working on right now is developing an RFP, which will go out in very early 2022. And the grant that we received, essentially, what we need to do is produce at least 20 affordable units by 2024. So the PDC is essentially positioned to provide gap funding to developers, whether that be nonprofit, private, city-owned, that are looking to develop affordable housing. And of course, we'd love to stretch that funding to bring even more units online. So I know some of you probably received an RSVP. We are hosting a roundtable on December 9th at 9 a.m. I don't see a chat option, but my email is olivia@cspdc.org. And if you're interested, I'd be happy to forward you an RSVP. And then, as Crystal mentioned, we are also undergoing the very initial steps of starting a regional housing study. And you're absolutely right. We have a huge region that includes Bath and Highland and Harrisonburg, Rockingham. So while we are hoping to give locality specific recommendations, totally understand the need to dig even deeper and get that kind of site level information. So that's sort of where we are, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Olivia. Do we have any other discussion, questions? I'm happy to answer any further questions if I can about the READY grant and what I'm hearing from the chamber perspective from our business community.
I guess one comment is I've talked to some developers about affordable or workforce housing, and they did mention zoning issues more so in the county. But it would be good for all 3 localities to get feedback on their zoning, on what areas there are restrictions that are preventing us from having affordable housing. I think we all realize Lexington we've got our own set of issues, because if we build affordable housing, unless there's some way to restrict it like Habitat is able to do, it gets gobbled up right away. And it'd be nice. We are looking at trying to get owners of downtown properties to develop their upstairs apartments, which right now are some of our sources of affordable housing. But once they make that investment, it's going to go, it'll be market rate housing. So we run into that conundrum. But I think Planning Commission would greatly appreciate any feedback from any groups that see problems with some of our zonings that prevents us from having affordable housing.
And as Charlie mentioned, that the only way a developer can afford affordable housing and offer affordable rent is to enter into an agreement with one of the programs that offers the subsidy. And it's just not something that a developer is going to say, I'm going to just charge you $400 a month rent when they have their own mortgage to pay. When they enter into a subsidy, if that rent is, after rent studies determine that they can charge $800 to $1,000 for that particular unit, then the other part of that comes from the government, so that it's offered as affordable housing to them, to prospective tenants, but the owner gets their full share of what their apartment or the building is worth. Are you still on, Charlie?
I am. Last week was the governor's conference on housing, and it was in Waterside in Norfolk specifically. But one of the sessions that they held featured a group out of Charlottesville, and I forget the name right now. It was something like Central Virginia Housing Commission. And it was a group based of the city of Charlottesville and all of the counties that touch Charlottesville. And they were utilizing housing plans that all of them together developed. And I'm just wondering if a system like that might not work for this area, for Rockbridge County, Buena Vista, and Lexington, to collaboratively and as a unit develop these programs. That was really very interesting.
Hey, this is Jamie again. I know within the last 2 or 3 years, there were some information sessions on opportunity zones. I'm not sure if there's ever been, and I could be wrong, part of my ignorance if so, any info sessions on historic tax credits. What I'm getting to is there's the sophisticated developers that may be comfortable with that or may have teams who are comfortable with that. But I believe there is a stock of would-be investors that could invest, but had not yet reached that level of sophistication. So I think it may be useful for someone. I'm happy to contribute some time to this effort to figure out ways to get some of those intro sessions going for our local investors. They don't have to be the huge millionaires. They could be the folks that believe in this community and believe in the purpose and could invest. I know there are folks who could be interested in investments, partnerships, cooperatives. I'm not sure what the structure may be. And I know there are individuals who could do it themselves. But those little things like the historic tax credits, the opportunity zone information could push them over the edge and help create that domino effect. So I think some info sessions for the non-sophisticated investor for those things could be useful.
Yeah, let me add on to that. That's a really good idea. And that exact thing has happened in some communities around Virginia. The best example I can think of is the town of Floyd in Floyd County. Floyd is a town where there's been a fair number of retirees coming in from outside the area. These are people who have some money. And so they formed an investment group. There were about 15 of them, and they formed an investment group, and they ended up facilitating the development of a number of venues in downtown Floyd. Those of you who've been there, you know, there's a what is it called? The Country Store, which is a bluegrass venue. They bought that, refurbished it, put an outside space there. They did a small boutique hotel downtown. They did a mixed use building that had some housing in it. And so, yeah, that idea of doing a information session, and as a part of that, pulling in some of the people in your community who may be investors. You know, maybe they're not $1 million investors, but maybe they're, you know, if you get 10 or 15 people who each willing to put up $50,000, $100,000, then, you know, you have a pretty decent investment pool. So that's a great idea. And it has worked in other areas. The other thing I'd say, I also attended the Governor's Housing Conference, and one of the sessions I went to that I learned something at was done by the City of Norfolk Planning Department. And they talked about this sort of experimental zoning that they were doing in one neighborhood of Norfolk, which is Old Huntersville. And they experimented with lot sizes, lot frontages, with shared driveways between new houses that were being built, infill, accessory dwelling units, which they permit in a number of zones in Norfolk. So Norfolk's doing some interesting things, experimentation around their zoning, that would encourage you to reach out to their planning department and talk with them.
And going back to what Jamie said, in regard to investors and people having deep pockets or what have you, even though it was 52 years ago, Rockbridge Area Housing at Mountain View Terrace was started with just a small group of people who were from the neighborhood and just wanted to start the process of making sure that generations of families didn't have to live together in 2 and 3 bedroom homes that their parents lived in or grandparents lived in. Because of that overcrowding in a couple of neighborhoods, started the process of working with HUD, which had just formed around that time, to make this happen. So it doesn't necessarily require those deep pockets. It just requires the interest, the energy, and the dedication to it to make it happen.
Yeah, to that point, Marilyn, I know we've talked a lot about the demand side, but perhaps some of our partners at the state or regional level can shed some insight on the supply side. That is the typical non-million dollar investor profile. How can we reach out to them and resonate with them? I'm sure we all have our suspicions, and it could be that the facts just merely confirm those. But I think that would behoove us as we move forward.
Yeah, because as I said, that was 52 years ago. So I don't know if that profile has required a change in that or not. That's something that maybe Charlie or Bob could address.
Can I jump in with a question real quick? When we're a few terms that I need to be defined. When we talk about affordable housing, are we talking about rental housing and ownership, of housing? And if we are talking about both those, which I expect we are, do we need to address those differently when we're talking about creating affordable housing, increasing affordable housing? The second thing is piggybacking on something Jamie said, and I think Bob mentioned this earlier, is the notion of opportunity zone just a little bit too nefarious right now to really pursue and talk about in terms of opportunity zones? So those are a couple of questions. Thank you.
I can answer one part of that. When you talk to HUD or you talk to housing development, they work with people who are potential renters as well as potential homeowners, and assist in either one of those processes. Others might want to kick in and answer some of the rest of that question.
Well, I'll chime in. I think probably from the city's point of view, that you may want to handle them somewhat differently. I'm not there. There are some commonalities, but there are some distinct differences that would need to be addressed from the city's point of view, such as zoning and so forth. And as far as HUD's concerned, HUD is interested in housing people, be it in an affordable multifamily or affordable single-family detached housing. So yeah, you'll get somebody from HUD who's willing to assist in any way, but the groundwork, I think, from your point of view, you may want to look at them as separate issues.
Yeah, as Bob mentioned, we should probably focus on something rather than focus on a lot of things at one time.
Bob, thank you very much for joining us. I know that you said you had to go here shortly, but just from the entire group, thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to, help as you go on down the road here. I think you're headed in a great direction and onward. And Charlie and I are both at your beck and call when you need us.
This is John. Bob, before you go, going back to Crystal's question about what's next, and happy to hear this RFP is on its way through the system and having a local focus on housing needs. That's fantastic. But I think you gave us some good thoughts about go ahead and invite some other people down to talk to us. Mm-hmm. And is there a little bit of a chicken and the egg? Should we have that study in hand, or should we just start talking to people?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my advice would be start talking to people.
Okay.
I think you're gonna, sounds like you're in the planning stages for both of these housing studies. And so, you're, many months off from having any results from that. So, I think you've got a good handle on what the issues are that are important to you. These studies are going to help you to refine that a bit, but you're not completely driving blind here. And so, I would definitely bring in some of these resources from state agencies that I talked about. And I think doing, to Jamie's point or suggestion, beginning to think about doing some information sessions that community members generally can participate in is also a great idea. I mean, I would just sort of keep the energy going and, build your group and get the benefit of the expertise that's out there. There are a lot of people who will want to help you. So I would say get them on board. Yeah.
I would have to agree with that. I think involving some of the folks that Bob mentioned could very definitely help you tweak whatever program you put together and whatever path you take going forward.
Do you think that, and this is to both of you, do you think that we should make a decision about focusing on one or the other, the rental of affordable housing or the ownership of?
I think it would depend on your capacity.
Do you think we should do both at the same time or just focus on one at a time?
Well, there are some commonalities that you can get some shared interest or shared support with, but it depends a lot on the capacity of the community.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can do both. I guess my cautionary note there was don't try to do everything that's in your plan. You've got a bunch of strategies and they range across a whole variety. As I said, affordable housing is a big spectrum, and most communities have issues at many points along the spectrum. So I think you could easily, you could work with Lynn and Habitat and maybe and others to try to develop some workforce home ownership housing within the city, if you can identify some sites. And at the same time, you could certainly be working on trying to stimulate over the shop housing downtown that might create some workforce rental housing. So I think, yeah, I think you can do a couple of things, but I guess to Charlie's point, it does depend on capacity. Somebody's got to be driving the bus, right? So it's not going to happen by itself. And so you need to be a little bit cognizant of the resources. And that's why I think, what I said is do some asset mapping and figure out who your partners are and who you can bring in, because, some of those partners are going to want to be helpful in terms of helping to drive initiatives forward. So
I have a question for Marilyn. This is Bruce Sigler, the housing director for Rockbridge County. And I'm the one that administers the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program.
Yeah.
So are you looking at, when you say rentals, where increasing possibly the amount of housing stock that people could utilize the Section 8 voucher at, or some other type of subsidy?
Either one. Initially, I was thinking in terms of more affordable housing developments, such as multifamily housing, that would be, of course, subsidized. In regard to the vouchers, I know that people who now have them in hand are not finding enough housing in this area in order to be able to move into. Or there are so many people who are not accepting the voucher and they're going to have to turn their vouchers back in. And I've heard about this from a couple of people that, you have so graciously selected to provide a voucher to. So I think it goes hand in hand. I think we need all of it. We need single family homes for people that are carrying a voucher to be able to move into and rent and get their full rent that would come from the subsidy. And then there are needs for additional multifamily housing. There's a need for elderly housing. There's a need for market rate housing. We need all of it. There's no stone that we should leave unturned.
Hi, this is Tom Roberts from the city of Buena Vista. And I just wanted to briefly say that we are very excited about looking at housing from a regional level. Buena Vista definitely, we need housing. We have, housing challenges as well. We need housing and we need affordable housing as well, affordable and workforce and that whole spectrum. And so, one thing kind of on the last few minutes of discussion as far as purchase or rent or, houses or apartments, I think if we're able to do this Rockbridge region housing study, that's going to point out some of the areas of greatest need and areas of greatest opportunity, so that I'm hoping that it's going to be able to identify some low-hanging fruit, so to speak. So that was one thing. Another thing that I just want to point out is that we've talked about, affordable housing kind of for people that are already here, but we definitely need to increase the amount of housing because the availability of housing is holding back our employers. If there was more housing here, we would have more people moving here. All of the manufacturers are hiring dozens of people. All of our large manufacturers are have dozens of open positions. And, they could attract people to move here if there was a place for them to live.
Yeah.
And again, a lot with, these manufacturing jobs, they pay well for manufacturing jobs, but you're still in that sort of workforce housing, and affordable housing, depending on other aspects of the family size and other earners and that sort of thing. You're in that affordable and workforce housing realm. So that applies to Lexington as well as Buena Vista, I think.
And to piggyback, thank you, Tom, to piggyback off of what you just said, I think it's important to remember that we are a whole community. So if we can get a study that shows us that Buena Vista's got available resources and assets for the manufacturing companies, then that's going to also benefit the county as a whole. It's going to benefit the business community of Lexington. I think it's important to remember we're not operating in silos here. Like, if we can get this housing issue fixed, we're going to be bringing more people into the community that are taxpayers for whichever jurisdiction, but that will still go out and support local businesses as they can. So that I just wanted to throw that in there.
Hey, this is Jamie. Not to be a broken record, but the chorus is often worth repeating, right? We need, in terms of next steps and studies and task forces and renting versus buying, I would love for there to be a representative from each of the municipalities in each of those efforts.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
As Crystal and Tom alluded to, there will be, of course, the indirect benefits in terms of taxes and other things like that, but there will be direct benefits in terms of the synergizing of ideas. And
Yes.
It's incalculable, and you can be positive or pessimistic about it, but that is what I'm pushing for.
Yes, agreed. You said that far more eloquently than I did.
Any other questions, comments? Advice?
This is John. I like Charlie's model of Charlottesville, kind of sitting in the middle, and everything that touches it is, looking at that kind of partnership. So I guess what I'm getting at is we've made this strong. We've emphasized the need for regional cooperation, which is absolutely correct, because housing is a regional market. It's not a local market. And maybe what we need to be looking at as we explore all these different options is some models for that cooperation. So that's just, how do we structure it? We say we want to do it, so how can we do it? And are there good examples out there of how to do it? So I think that can be some of the homework that can be done.
That's a very good point.
At that session at the governor's conference, the CEO, I don't recall, but maybe I can locate their names. The CEO of the group and the executive director were both on the panel talking about how they were able to accomplish things, not just for the city of Charlottesville, but for, I think it was 5 counties that actually touch Charlottesville. And that was the size of their group. In this case, Rockridge County surrounds both Buena Vista and Lexington. And I think that is a 3-party partnership, if you will. And there's strength in numbers, quite frankly.
Charlie, if you have information that we can further research that partnership, and if you're willing to share it?
Absolutely. I'm willing to share anything I've got.
Okay, that would be great. I'd love to look through that a little bit more.
If I could just jump in.
I will contact, I have a good friend at HCD, which sponsors the governor's conference, Housing and Community Development in Richmond, who I used to work with at HUD. And I'll get in touch with my friend Jay Grant and find out the names and maybe contact information of those 2 people.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I just wanted to quickly jump in. That was the Central Virginia. I was at that panel as well, Charlie, and it was wonderful. And I talked to the panelists afterward. That was the Central Virginia Regional Housing Partnership.
Yes.
And it's administered by TJPDC, the Thomas Jefferson Commission. And I believe the chair's name is Keith Smith. And I know the executive director of the PDC, Christine Jacob, so I can also pass along that information as well.
That's great. Thank you.
I think having, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
I think having that study done is going to go a long way because, it's my understanding that there's a housing shortage throughout the country and we really need to pinpoint, in our area, what does that housing shortage look like? And when we know, roughly how many housing units we would need to develop, I think that could go a long way in terms of planning steps forward. So I think
Wonderful.
That's be great.
I apologize. I can't see you. Could you identify yourself?
Oh, Nicholas Betts.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Hey, this is Jamie. A point and a question. The first point is, someone said earlier, we have 2 universities. We have 4 colleges though, all of which have plenty of students and employees. So I think that's worth mentioning. Here in Rockbridge, we are spoiled with our number of higher ed institutions. I can't imagine too many other counties in Virginia that can make that claim.
Yes.
In terms of next steps, who's going to be in charge of delegating those? Is that Marilyn, Crystal?
I think, well, what do you think, Marilyn?
I think that we should roll back to threshold for threshold to make that decision. We need to have a discussion about how to move forward and rather than haphazardly, to make sure that we're doing it the right way, going back to where we started with threshold in order to move forward.
Marilyn, if I could make a suggestion that just is running on what's been said at the table so far, perhaps having an informal meeting with the Rockbridge Housing Authority, whoever in Buena Vista has that mission, to meet with you and Chris about the Lexington situation, just to explore the opportunities and resources within the 3 institutions is probably you're going to end up there anyway. So you might as well start with some informal conversations about what the 3 jurisdictions might be able to provide in the way of looking at this as a holistic problem around the community. Obviously, all 3 jurisdictions in the end will also be looking at their situations.
That's a good idea, Lee.
My apologies, but what was the organization? We've mentioned so many.
Buena Vista and the Rockbridge County respective housing authorities.
Meet with whom?
Meet with threshold.
Okay.
So that the 3 jurisdictions that represent housing,
yes,
have initial conversation.
Okay.
To move forward.
Thank you.
We do have a threshold meeting next Wednesday, and we could invite those folks to our meeting if that's okay with the chair and vice chair, or at least try to. It's a short time frame, but perhaps we can get that started. And the other thing I'd like to add, we can also, as staff, use our contacts at DHR, Department of Historic Resources, for that tax credit seminar that Jamie mentioned earlier. So we can reach out and see if there's someone available to come and do that, or use our Zoom virtual meeting and perhaps get something like that started as well.
Okay.
Along the idea of the tax credits, Main Street's kind of working on having similar seminars, so that we can talk about that and work together on it.
Okay. Do you think that'll be Zoom?
Preferably.
Okay. Great. Any last comments, John?
Wonderful conversation. We started it.
Yes.
We're going to fulfill the need.
Yes.
If I could make a comment, don't let the immediate situations sway your resolve in this matter. By that, I mean the cost of building materials right now is astronomical. As an example, OSB or sheeting 4x8 sheets of sheeting have gone from $11 to $38. But hopefully that will get resolved at some point when the supply chain heals itself.
Yes, thank you, Charlie.
Charlie, I have a question. We know, of course, that subsidies available for new construction, subsidies available for continuing, the projects that already exist. What about, and as well as single family housing, what about rehab housing and tax credits? Do you know anything about a relationship with that?
I really don't, Marilyn. I don't know the most immediate situations. As I have mentioned, I've been retired nearly 10 years now, and I've been out of the loop about that long. But one thing that you could do is talk to the voucher suppliers, Virginia Housing or the Rockbridge Housing Authority, and see what their current guidelines are as far as supplying support for those types of properties.
Okay. One of my biggest frustrations is seeing dilapidated houses, abandoned houses, and those houses could be renovated to be made available to people who are either willing to rent them with a housing voucher, or people who are, willing to purchase them and live in them.
I absolutely support renovation of dilapidated and existing housing. First of all, the cost of the materials is not as much, obviously, because a lot of it's already there. And if it can be modified to be more modern, so to speak, then you're money ahead. And part of the subsidy that's really needed to produce affordable housing, not only in the form of rent or mortgage payment, is capital investment, the cost of the structure. And if you can subsidize the cost of the structure by rebuilding something that's already there, then that makes sense.
Yeah, it goes a long way to preserving a neighborhood. And if it preserves the neighborhood, it helps preserve the entire area, the community.
That is true. But at the same token, if it's a historical site, you still have to deal with the State Historic Preservation Society.
Sure, absolutely.
If I can just chime in, I know we're in the last 5 minutes of the meeting, but especially in situations for either renovation of existing single-family homes or new construction of single-family homes, one method of affordable housing provision is a community land trust. I don't know if you all have heard of that, but a community land trust is a nonprofit organization, and usually the way they're structured is they will acquire or construct a house, a single-family home usually. They will then retain ownership of the land, and then they will sell the house itself, sell the structure to a qualifying person, at whatever income limit is appropriate. And so that way, and then the structure becomes permanently affordable in that, you sell to a family, and that family is income qualified when they purchase the house, and then they may stay there 10 years. They're building equity because they own the house, they have a mortgage on it, and then when they sell it at the end of 10 years, as part of the whole CLT model, there's a maximum appreciation. So there might be a maximum appreciation of 1% or 2% or 5% per year or something like that. So that after 10 years, there's a cap on how much that house can cost to the next person. The next person must also be income qualified. And then this just goes on forever and ever. So that is that's one model that that we could consider. To make the nonprofit viable, you have to have, you know, a critical mass of houses that they own. But you know, there's a whole lot more to look into that. But that could be, that can end up preserving neighborhoods, as well as scattered site housing, and you know, they can partner with Habitat for Humanity, could potentially go that direction. There's some interesting opportunities with that model.
The community land trusts will work both with having existing housing on it and also new construction.
Oh,
Works well with that too.
oh,
Charlie, are there examples of those cross-jurisdictional? In other words, that the three of us all get involved?
Whoops, I hit mute. Yes, I'm sure there are. Right now, I can't think of one close by. Give me some time and I'll, if I come across something, I'll mention it to Marilyn.
thank you, Charlie.
Since I have Marilyn's phone number.
The thing I love about what Tom just said is, and one of the things that's been that's hard, is the notion that there's equity established in doing this kind of community land trust. And I think equity is a huge component of affordable housing. We don't want just people to be able to live here. We want people to invest in the community and in themselves, their families. So I really like that idea of Tom's.
Yeah. There are a few people right here in Lexington who have resources that are looking at a model just like that. And I will reach out to them to see if they would like to, at some point, join this conversation. Okay.
I think Pat had his hand up earlier.
Pat?
I did not have a question. I just wanted to say thank you for Marilyn and John and Ari for putting this together, because I'm on the Planning Commission in Lexington, and I'm pretty much a neophyte in these matters. And so this has been educational. I think it's done, from my perspective, exactly what you all envisioned it doing when you put this together. So I haven't made any comments because I haven't really had a lot to contribute. So I'm here learning. So thanks very much. I thought this has been great.
I have just about what's next, or an option that among the Planning Commission, we could be discussing what our role could be in addressing the land use and zoning issues. And is that something that we give a particular focus on next year in our annual review of zoning, of our zoning code? So that, and we've already got that in train in terms of accessory dwellings. Because as Marilyn has pointed out, and many people have tonight, we're trying to touch many different segments of the housing market. So, but I think that's something for us to put on the agenda for how could we address this next year in our work.
I agree with that. And the sooner the better, because, you know, people are talking about accessory dwellings, talking about tiny houses, talking about, I was looking at something the other day from a housing development entity talking about garages and businesses and entrepreneurs and how all of that can come into the mix. So there's a lot of conversations being had already because this is a need across the nation. And this is going to be a real journey for us. And I'm happy to see so many people in on this conversation this evening. And hopefully all of those people will be wanting to be a part of this journey because I think we will find a reward from this to see somebody get in a home or get into an apartment who's been homeless is probably one of the best feelings I've ever had. So I'm telling you, it is worth it.
Hoorah.
I just had this last week, so I'm on the bandwagon.
I echo that, Marilyn. I worked with Rockridge Area Habitat for 3 years, and seeing those families get those keys meant a lot to me personally.
Yeah.
So it is very rewarding work. And
Yeah.
I appreciate everyone that showed up today to help us kind of find our path, to help us with information and resources. I cannot thank you all enough.
Yeah, to see them get those keys and then they start crying and like,
yes.
Stop!
And then I cried too.
All right.
Is there anything else that we would like to cover or discuss?
I'd just like to add that these experts you brought in tonight, which was huge in terms of infusing this community with a sense of purpose and momentum, the resources are out there.
Yes.
The need is known. We haven't precisely defined it. And let's face it, folks, affordable housing is subsidized housing. And subsidized housing is not a taboo thing. This is supported housing. This is who the collective community wants to see have this housing. So the sooner we can get this ball rolling with a center, with some direction to find out how to structure it, as John Driscoll was saying, is really the critical thing, because it the need expresses itself somewhat differently in the county and in Lexington and Buena Vista, but it's just a matter of we need to build some more housing because people are moving here. Investors are coming in here, snapping up houses in communities because they want to have something here and they don't even necessarily live here.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's get on with some projects, and the sooner we can find a structure that can execute that in the next 1, 2, 3 years, we can be that 20 units that the Central Shenandoah thing has aspirations somewhere in its own. We can do that in one fell swoop. So let's just get on with something.
I
might point out that you think back to when you first bought a house, you homeowners that are on this call. If it was a VA loan, it was subsidized. If it was an FHA loan, it was subsidized by interest rate. If you got money from parents to help you with down payment, that's subsidy. Think back, I know myself, my first home was a veterans loan, and it was subsidized. So there's nothing bad.
Right there, Charlie. USDA Rural Development Loan, my first home, and that was only 7 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, there are a lot of people on this bandwagon, but when we were having the public hearings for the land on Spotswood Drive, I did hear some naysayers, and it hurt me to my heart that, you know, people I know feel negatively about subsidized housing or affordable housing work, or whatever you want to call it. But it's going to take us to educate and remind them of those things that Charlie said about those things that you don't necessarily think is being subsidized. They probably benefited from subsidies themselves.
And that was a good point to mention USDA, because they do housing in communities of 10,000 population or less.
Yes.
And those houses are relatively affordable.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Anyone who's against housing subsidy should be against the mortgage interest tax deduction.
There you go.
Right.
There you go.
Right.
Most wealthy people have taken advantage of that.
All right. Arnie, anything else we need to do?
Nothing here, just to thank Charlie, thank Bob for their time, effort, and expertise.
Absolutely.
Thank you to the Planning Commission, Threshold, and all our other partners this evening, Tom and Lindsay and Olivia and others, and Lee. We're all listening in and participating, so thank you all.
And other members of Planning Commission, Threshold, thank you all for participating this evening as well. We'll be back. We'll let you know when we're ready for the next conversation to move this forward.
Indeed.
Thank you so much.
I'm ready to participate.
Yes. We'll call you.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
Good night.
Everyone, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.